Okay, so what is substance addiction? Well, substance addiction, which is medically often referred to as substance use disorder, is an illness that involves the mind and body. And Dr. Deepak Chopra says, we are not the mind, we create the mind. We create the body, and through our body and through our mind, we ultimately create our experience of the world, suggesting that the mind and body are very much connected. And I actually remember in a recent interview I watched, he actually said the mind and body are so intertwined that they're virtually the same thing. So a Harvard Health article called Understanding Addiction defines it pretty well bang on. It states addiction involves craving for something intensely, loss of control over its use, and continuing involvement with it despite adverse consequences. So that's what it looks like on the outside, but what is actually going on within the individual? Addiction affects three main parts of the brain: the prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, and the midbrain. The first, the prefrontal cortex, is the part of the brain that is responsible for our decision making, our logic, and our reasoning. As it relates to addiction, this is the part of the brain where we decide if something is a good or bad decision on all subjects. The second, the limbic system, is the part of the brain which contains the reward circuit and facilitates our memory. As it relates to addiction, this is the part of the brain where we feel well-being and remember it in detail. The third, the midbrain, is a part of the brain which is concerned only about the next 15 seconds. This is responsible for our vision, our hearing, and our fight or flight response. So as it relates to addiction, this is the part of the brain that is the channel to the spinal cord and body responsible for our survival functions. Now, what happens when drugs are introduced to the bloodstream for the first time, either directly or indirectly? Well, the chemical in the drug or alcohol crosses the blood-brain barrier and delivers an inhumane amount of a neurotransmitter called dopamine to our reward circuit in the limbic system. In fact, up to 10 times the amount of the neuronominal range we experience day to day. At the exact same time, there was another surge of a neurotransmitter called glutamate, increasing our memory of that moment with greater intensity and more detail. So when drugs or alcohol chemical crosses the blood-brain barrier for the first time, the individual feels 10 times more euphoric than their best day ever and remembers it with more intensity and more detail than any other memory. And reflecting back on my own experience, I can tell you without a doubt, this is actually what's happening. Then, when the effect of this euphoria leaves the limbic system, the individual often makes the decision, using the prefrontal cortex, that it is a good idea to take the drug or alcohol again because it felt so good and it was remembered with more intensity and greater detail than other memories. So the individual introduces the drug or alcohol chemical into the bloodstream again. But this time, the amount of dopamine is just a little bit less and the amount of glutamate is just a little bit less, causing the individual to feel a little less euphoric and remember it with a little less detail and a little less intensity. But because the individual remembers the first time euphoria so well, the reasoning in the prefrontal cortex is used to make the decision exactly the same way, for the exact same reasons. This pattern of brain activity is carried out over and over again, with the brain remembering the highest level of euphoria the most to make the decision to take the drug or alcohol over and over. Now, as external and internal consequences start to appear in the experience of the individual, why doesn't the individual use the reasoning in the prefrontal cortex and make the decision to stop introducing the drug or alcohol chemical into the body? Well, they can't. This is because the part of our brain which controls our survival functions, the midbrain, has become more and more sensitive. The repeated surge of dopamine and glutamate has altered the midbrain to prioritize the drug or alcohol chemical for survival. The midbrain becomes overly active, activating the reward circuit in the limbic system even without the drug or alcohol chemical. now making a survival decision without the awareness of the individual that it must have the drug or alcohol chemical. The midbrain is also the pathway to the spinal cord and body. Using the nervous system, it makes it imperative to the body that it must take the drug or alcohol chemical for survival. This is happening without the awareness at all in the subconscious mind of the individual before a decision can be made in the conscious mind, specifically the prefrontal cortex, to stop using the drug or alcohol. The drug addict literally does not have the choice to stop. So what does this look like? This is what we're seeing in the world today. A study from the National Center of Drug Abuse Statistics, most recently updated in 2020 for the United States specifically, states there are 96,000 overdoses every year. 72% of those being opioid related. We see overdoses are up 30% every year from 2000 to 2020. We see individuals that will literally do anything to get drugs, whether this be something as seemingly minor as compromising their values or character, to stealing or manipulation, to prostitution, and all the way up to killing others or themselves. We see the extreme difficulties, sacrifices, cost, and heartbreak of the ripple effect that every addict has on their loved ones, communities, and societies. So what happens when through some sort of detox period, the drug or alcohol intake into the bloodstream is stopped? Well, the dopamine levels drop so far down, they fall below the narrow nominal range we experience as humans. This can manifest into very many different things. Difficult experiences such as depression, severe lack of motivation, physical problems, and very negative experiences in life. So what does this look like? This is also what we see in the world today. Hopeless drug addicts that try to stop but relapse. Constant relapsing that convince themselves and the world that drug addiction cannot be overcome. Or we see addiction as a mystery and that few recover from the illness but most do not. We see a wide range of addiction recovery techniques and theories that have very low success rates and a wide range of opinions as to what recovery from addiction should be. One thing that most can actually agree on is that something evidence-based, easy to apply, long-term, and predictively consistent is needed. This is what's needed to be really useful for individuals who suffer from addiction. So, if millions of people have recovered from addiction, and I assure you there have been, how is it done? Well, it's not a mystery anymore. What an individual with substance addiction needs to recover is abstinence and a quickly applied shift in all the major areas of their life to have well-being. That's simple. By doing this, as it relates to addiction in the brain, the top-down control of the survival need for the drug or alcohol chemical is eliminated, and three things change in the brain. Firstly, the dopamine level that is in the individual rises to the upper part of the nominal range. Secondly, that memory of the highest level of well-being from the very first time the drug or alcohol was taken is broken. Thirdly, the relatively consistently high level of dopamine within our nominal range has provided genuine well-being, so that the brain moves out of survival mode and into creation. This is completed 100% within the individual. We know this is true and has evidence-based science we can see through the work of amazing people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and others who have dedicated their lives to the work. So what does this look like? Well, what we see is an individual who is virtually hopeless become whole, full of well-being and no compulsion to use drugs or alcohol. We see all major areas of their life improve significantly, driven by a true understanding of who they really are. We see their ability to create their life the way they want it is intentionally used, and responsibility for their life is finally owned. They create, contribute, and love.